We've talked about a lot of different pieces of the Marvel arsenal lately. We've touched upon items belonging to specific heroes, like I did a little bit ago with my video on Green Goblin's armory. And we've even ranked the weapons belonging to specific groups, such as in our ranking of Asgardian weapons. So let's keep this train a-rollin' and switch things up a bit. Now let me ask you something. What is the coolest type of melee weapon that there is? Obviously, it's swords. Blades, longswords, katanas, gladiuses, claymores, all those fun implements of pain. Sorry, axe fans, swords are just way cooler. And mace fans, you guys need to go sit down and rethink your life. As such, some of the most powerful weapons in the Marvel Universe are swords. Don't believe me? Well, in this video, I'm gonna go through a handful of the most overpowered blades in the comics, ranking them from least to most powerful. So without any further ado, let's go ahead and dive right into it. You know, it seems like pretty much every single fantasy franchise that includes dragons at some point brings up the idea of taking a dragon tooth and carving it into a dagger or sword of some kind. And seemingly every time it always winds up being a powerful weapon. Well, it seems that this is one specific trope that Marvel certainly took part in, as here we have Dragonfang, the sword most commonly associated with Valkyrie. Created by a wizard from the tooth of some long-dead extra-dimensional dragon, this sword once belonged to the Ancient One, who eventually passed it down to his successor, the Sorcerer Supreme, Dr. Strange. Strange, not really being much of a sword guy himself, gave it to Valkyrie when she found herself without a weapon following her passing off of the Ebony Blade back to Dane Whitman. Now, this is far more than just a fancy sword. First off, this thing is indestructible, which is kind of bog standard for fancy Marvel weapons, honestly. What isn't so standard is its ability to enhance the combat abilities of whoever wields it. So if you know nothing about fighting and pick this thing up, you'll fare pretty well in combat. But if you are a competent swordsman already, you'll suddenly be able to challenge gods. That's a pretty freaking cool power. Not exactly earth-shattering, but hey, still super useful. In addition to being really cool looking in general, swords also seem to make up the vast majority of the most well-known weapons from myths and legends as well. One such example is Excalibur, the sword once belonging to the mythical King Arthur. You know, the whole story of the sword and the stone? You know the one. Well, this famous blade also appears within Marvel Comics. According to what we see on the page, Excalibur was the sword that was used by Beowulf to slay Grendel's mother before it disappeared briefly from history. The next time it was seen was when Sir Bran wielded it alongside a time-traveling Iron Man to slay a dragon. During the fight, the blade became embedded in a large boulder. From there, the usual events of the legend took place. Arthur pulled the sword out, became king, founded Camelot, and created the Knights of the Round Table. All that stuff. So what makes this sword so special? Outside of its connection to legends, that is. Well, the sword has the ability to take down pretty much anyone and anything that finds themselves on the receiving side of it. That includes gods, monsters, and even spirits. That alone is pretty freaking powerful, but it gets better. Anyone who wields it becomes completely invincible as long as they have it, meaning they can't take damage of any kind. Picking this thing up is like typing IDDQD in Doom, glowing eyes optional. That's pretty awesome and definitely powerful, but there are bigger fish yet to come on this very list. Next up is a sword that you might actually be a bit familiar with, as it's one that has gotten a ton of attention lately due to its connection to Dane Whitman, a character who made his big MCU debut in Eternals just recently. I'm of course talking about the Ebony Blade. This magical sword can trace its roots all the way back to Merlin himself, who, along with Sir Percy, forged this sword from pieces of the Starstone meteorite. This is the signature weapon of the Black Knight, a mantle passed down through the generations, having been taken up by many different people, before coming to Dane Whitman, the modern-day Black Knight. This sword is said to be able to cut through literally anything, including dense metals such as vibranium or adamantium. It also makes its wielder unable to be killed, and can be used to block magical attacks. It also has a lot of other smaller powers that honestly are just simply too few to list here. However, it also comes with one major downside. Every time the blade is used to draw blood, it slowly begins to drive its owner mad. That's kinda a pretty big downside. So much so that women actually stopped using the sword at one point. It just wasn't worth it to him. That being said, for short-term usage, it could prove to be a major boon for anyone who decides to pick it up. Just gotta know when to put it back down. You know, making swords out of metal and meteorites and all that is cool and all, but it doesn't hold a candle to the sheer badassery that is manifesting one out of one's own life force. When Magic found herself trapped within limbo, she used eldritch energy to draw forth the Soulsword. While a simple looking blade at first, this sword became more and more intricate looking as Magic wielded it, eventually becoming something incredibly ornate. Unlike other swords, this weapon is an extension of Magic herself, and therefore, it's not super easy for others to wield it. It's happened before, but it's not a common occurrence. As a side effect though, anyone who does get to wield it is the rightful ruler of Limbo, so that's a thing. However, that's all sort of okay, because this sword's usage is extremely situational, as it has been shown to really only be capable of harming creatures whose origins are magical in nature. However, against ethereal targets, this blade is a force to be reckoned with. This sword can also be used to break spells, as anyone who is possessed or enchanted that is struck by it will be released of these magical influences. So okay, it's a super situational weapon that isn't going to be useful to many people, but that doesn't stop it from being a powerful one regardless. Also, its appearance was definitely a highlight of the New Mutants film. It was actually a halfway decent movie that I think far too many people slept on. As one of the most powerful, albeit in a fairly nebulous way, things within the Marvel Universe, pretty much anything associated with the Phoenix Force sits fairly high on the power scale, and that is definitely true for the Blade of the Phoenix. Wielded long ago by an ancient Shi'ar warrior who was bonded with the Phoenix Force, this giant blade cut a bloody swath through several planets before the Shi'ar Empire managed to stop the warrior. Though the Phoenix Force moved on, a teeny tiny piece of it remained within the blade, imbuing it with part of its power. Wreathed in blue flame, the energy from this blade can be channeled into massive bursts, as well as strengthening the cutting force of the actual edge. While we haven't seen a lot from this sword, having only appeared a small handful of times within the comics, this thing could very well be capable of more than just that. This is the Phoenix Force that we're talking about here. So while it might not sound like it's anything beyond something like the Soulsword or the Ebony Blade, I'm gonna put it here on the list, if for nothing else but the potential of it. Just imagine if someone bonded with the Phoenix Force were to wield it again. It could be absolutely awe-inspiring. Hey, would you look at that? Yet another sword made out of some sort of mystical energy source. Don't worry, this is the last one, I swear. The Quantum Sword was the personal blade of Phyla-Vell, a Kree hybrid capable of some pretty crazy stuff. She crafted this weapon out of pure quantum energy, granting it the ability to absorb massive amounts of energy as well as outputting it, usually in the form of massive bursts. On top of that, this thing is a conduit for all of Phyla-Vell's powers. While she is extremely powerful on her own, being able to channel all of that power into a physical object allows her to utilize it to a much greater degree. This thing actually allows her to properly reach her full potential. However, this sword would eventually be her own downfall, as it was later used to slay her after it was transformed into the Oblivion Sword. That's pretty freaking rough. Within the Marvel Universe, pretty much all of the major pantheons exist all at once, which is kind of confusing when you think about it, but it's probably just best that you don't. It's cool, and that's all that really matters. So this has led to some fairly awesome battles between gods. One such battle was one that pitted Zeus, the king of Olympus, against a Japanese god that I'm not even gonna try to pronounce. For their battle, each god had a special blade crafted for the occasion. This led to the creation of Grasscutter and Godkiller. And that last name is extremely appropriate, as these two swords are capable of just that, killing gods. Even a mortal wielding it is able to draw divine blood, which is no small feat. And the two blades seem perfectly designed to face off against each other, as the only time we've ever seen them being damaged is the one time that they were broken while they were in combat against each other. Besides that, like pretty much every other magically enhanced weapon in the Marvel Universe, they seem to be completely indestructible. Beyond that though, the full extent of what these blades can do hasn't really been explored yet. That being said, anything that is worthy of being wielded by Zeus himself is probably definitely high on the power scale. Wolverine has proven over the years to be someone incredibly difficult to take down. The only way that has really seemed to take him out for any noteworthy amount of time was when he was encased in solid adamantium. Which, I mean, yeah, that would probably take anyone out. regardless of who they were. However, there is a weapon that would be capable of doing him in, that being the legendary Muramasa Blade. This sword was created by the legendary Japanese swordsmith Muramasa, who used a piece of Wolverine's soul to craft a blade that, quote, against which all, even one as great as you, will fall. And it is a fantastic weapon, able to wound pretty much anyone, which is fancy, I guess, but what makes this katana special is that when it does cut someone, they aren't gonna heal from that wound, at least not anytime soon. Even someone with a healing factor on par with old Logan over here would still struggle with being struck by this weapon. For instance, at one point during a battle with Captain America, Wolvie was cut by it. While normally this wound would close up nearly instantly, in this case it took several days for it to heal up, something that is basically unheard of for Logan. On top of that, it can cut through anything, including adamantium, which might not sound too interesting at this point, as pretty much every other blade on this list seems to have the same property. However, when you couple that with its ability to hinder healing factors, and suddenly you have something that is significantly more potent than any of the others. Cut off Wolverine's arm with something like the Soulsword, and he'll be fine. He'd just reattach it, no problem. Cut it off with the Muramasa Blade though, and it isn't going to be the case. Now, imagine if it took off his head instead. That would pretty well spell the end of Wolverine. Heck, you could probably even take out Deadpool with it if he really got on your nerves, which, come on, he totally would. You know, after spending 5 minutes with the guy, you'd probably be wishing you had this sword. Thor Ragnarok introduced mainstream audiences to the fiery doom of Asgard, the bringer of Ragnarok himself, Surtur. This giant demon-looking monster wields the Twilight Sword, also known as the Sword of Doom. And that is a super appropriate name, as even its forging required the destruction of an entire galaxy, specifically the home galaxy of the Corbinites, the race that Beta Ray Bill is. And this galaxy's life force was used to power the blade. Now, Bill actually got a chance to claim the sword for himself once, which he used to defeat Surtur after a long and heated battle. After that, it was hidden away in containment, which is totally understandable. Like many other blades on this list, the Twilight Sword is capable of cutting through literally anything, regardless of whether it is physical or magical. So basically, if someone is coming at you with this weapon, there really isn't anything that you can do to stop it. Which is extra terrifying, as this weapon was prophesied to be used to destroy all of Asgard and bring about Ragnarok. Which, I mean, yeah, it definitely did that. In a few different versions of the Marvel Universe, no less. However, it is possible to use the sword for the complete opposite of what it is best known for, as it can harness enough magical energy to reform a universe. Though don't expect to see Surtur doing this anytime soon. Kinda goes against his whole shtick. However, while the Twilight Blade is capable of some immense destruction, there is one that just might be more powerful. If you've previously watched the video that I did a while back ranking Asgardian weapons, you probably figured that this sword would be on this list somewhere, if not the top spot, just as it did over there. It's just too powerful not to have at the number one yet again. I am talking about the Odinsword. It is also worth noting that Odinsword is kind of just a general term for swords that Odin has owned. So calling this the Odinsword is kind of not correct. However, that is the name that it is most commonly referred to. In addition to being the largest sword on this list, easily coming in at several hundred feet in length, the Oversword of Asgard, as it is sometimes referred to, is yet another instrument of doom and destruction. Odin once stated that if this sword were to ever even be unsheathed, it would lead to the end of the universe as we know it. And this prophecy has almost been put to its test on several occasions, as quite a few enemies of Asgard have tried to pull the sword out over the years, including Mangog, a demonic creature that is the physical manifestation of the hatred of an entire race of beings that were killed in the past by Odin himself. So yeah, you could probably understand why it might want to bring an end to everything, largely just to spite the Allfather. However, it has actually been used in the comics. Odin himself unsheathed it and used it and the destroyer armor to attempt to do battle with the Celestials during the Fourth Host, which didn't actually work out for him, as they simply took it and melted it down like it was nothing. Still though, the possibilities of this sword, and the fact that it belongs to the Allfather himself, put it squarely at the top of this list. Plus, I mean, it's a giant freaking sword. That's just cool. Hey there everybody, I'm John Aldetz. I made this video, and now I want to know what you think. How would you rank the Marvel swords? Are there any that I left out? Let me know in the comments below or shoot me a response over on Twitter. I'd love to hear from you. Thanks for watching, and be sure to subscribe to CBR for more great videos like this in the future.